Broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Welcome, everyone. My name is Andrew Capehart with the Adult Protective Services Technical Assistance Resource Center, or APS TARC, and welcome to our event, APS Innovations Townhall on APS Language. This is part 2 to the part 1 that we did a little over a year ago, last year. We have several presenters and facilitators, which I will introduce on our next slide. We can go to the next slide. With us today are Jessica Burke, our very own Jessica Burke, consultant and subject matter expert with the APS TARC. We also have Chris Dubel. He's the director of the National Adult Protective Services Training Center at the National Adult Protective Services Association. And then we also have Toba Kasdan, a program specialist with the Office of Elder Justice and Adult Protective Services at the Administration for Community Living. And we have a great group of folks here today. So next slide. Before we get cracking, a quick disclaimer: the webinar is being hosted by the APS TARC, which is a project of the U.S. Administration for Community Living, Administration on Aging, Department of Health and Human Services, administered by WRMA Incorporated, my company. Contractors' findings, conclusions, and points of view do not necessarily represent the official policy of the federal government. Next slide. A little bit about the APS TARC if you're not terribly familiar with us. Our mission is to enhance the effectiveness of APS programs by working with partners on the use of data and analytics, applying research and evaluation practice, encouraging the use of innovative practices and strategies, and providing individualized technical assistance to APS programs across the country. We're here to basically help you in any way that we can. Just reach out to us with the contact information that'll be displayed on the last slide of today's webinar. Next slide. A few housekeeping points. In the handout section of your webinar control panel, you'll find the slides for today. You can download those at any time just by clicking on them. Please use your computer speakers to access audio for this webinar and adjust the audio as you see fit, or I'm sorry, the volume as you see fit. If you have any audio problems during the presentation, we recommend that you sign out of the webinar, exit it completely, and then come right back in. That usually fixes a lot of the problems. Next slide. We are recording this event. It'll be posted to the APS TARC YouTube channel. We'll notify all the registrants via email when it is posted online and announce the availability more broadly through our APS TARC outreach channels like social media. Everyone attending today will receive a certificate of attendance approximately 24 hours via email after the conclusion of the event. We're sorry we're not offering continuing education units for this webinar. And then you can ask questions or share comments by typing them in the questions box at any time during the webinar or by raising your hand, and we will unmute you. If we go on to the next slide, there'll be an example here of your GoToWebinar control panel. You may raise your hand using the small hand icon on your control panel, and then we'll be able to unmute you and let you speak. If we move on to the next slide, and you do want to make verbal comments, we can unmute you when you're ready to speak and you raise your hand, but then you'll also need to unmute yourself. And you've got the little microphone icon here, red circle. You need to click on that to be able to unmute yourself when you want to. If you're joining us by phone, make sure to enter your audio PIN number, which should be displayed on your control panel. I think it's a pound sign, usually a couple digits, and then another pound. You'll have to enter that in order for us to be able to unmute you for the event today so that you can speak verbally if you'd like to. So next slide. What I will do now is launch a quick poll just to get a sense for who is in the audience with us today. What profession do you identify most closely with? Do you identify as adult protective services? As a medical professional, a legal professional? Do you consider yourself more research academic or other social services? And you can vote by clicking directly on your screen. If you're in full screen mode, you may need to exit full screen mode to be able to vote. So leave this open for just a couple minutes or a few seconds and let people respond to the poll. Keep it open for about 15 more seconds to give a chance for people to respond. And then we will share the responses so that everybody can take a look. All right, I'm going to go ahead and close that poll out now and share the results. It looks like we were overwhelmingly adult protective services folks today. Don't have any folks that identify as medical, a few legal, research, academic folks, and then some folks that consider themselves other social services than adult protective services. Thanks for responding to that poll. So we'll go back to our slides. Now it is my pleasure to turn the floor over for a few welcoming comments to Tova Kasten, who I introduced earlier. So Tova, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Andy, and good afternoon. I'm Tova Kasten. I'm a project officer at ACL, and I'm really looking forward to today's discussion, which I know is at the heart of what we do at the Administration for Community Living, which is supporting older adults and adults with disabilities live as freely, autonomously, and safely as possible in the communities in which they choose to live. And language is at the heart of how older adults and adults with disabilities view themselves, and how service providers and systems that seek to support those in the community also view them. So we know this is a complex and nuanced conversation, and we look forward to learning and talking with you today.
Thank you so much, Tova. And now I will turn things over to Jessica Burke for a little bit to set the stage on reframing language. Jessica.
Hi, everybody. Thank you, Andy, and thank you so much for being here this afternoon and investing in your own professional development. I just kind of wanted to set the stage before we really dive into the contents of our webinar today. For those of you who don't know, I am a consultant with APS TARC. I also have 20 years of APS experience, starting in the early 2000s as an APS investigator in Southern California. And the way language looked in the early 2000s versus now, and how it's evolved over the years, has really shifted, and it continues to shift as we move towards more strength-based language. So today is an opportunity to raise awareness and to support the use of language and how we are reframing it, and also an opportunity to examine ourselves and our own language and how we're using language in our everyday practice. So I want to just encourage all of you to participate, be open to different views and ideas as we start to dive into the main part of our webinar today. So Andy, I'm going to hand it back over to you.
Good deal. Thank you so much, Jessica. And now it is my pleasure to pass the mic to my friend and colleague, Chris Dubel, to make a few remarks and lead our discussion on change of language in the field. Chris, you've got the floor.
Great, Andy. Hi, everybody. First, I just want to start by thanking all of you for taking time out of your busy schedules to continue this conversation with us. Earlier today, I was talking with someone and we talked about how our exploration of language is a journey and not a destination. So I'm excited to continue this journey with all of you. When we were thinking about putting this together, we thought it might be helpful to share a bit about our language journey at the National APS Training Center, NATC. In case you don't know, the NATC is funded by the Administration for Community Living and administered by the National Adult Protective Services Association to provide free e-learning to APS throughout the United States. As you can probably imagine, this meant a lot of decisions about language. And we spent a lot of time working with ACL, working with NAPSA committees and others, discussing and even debating the language we should use in our language journey. So we wanted to share 3 ideas when we were thinking about language that may be helpful to all of you. Some of you may be educators, but even when you are working with your teams in APS or other social services or legal, thinking about law, thinking about statutes, thinking about regulations and policies. These were the 3 things that we thought through each time we had that decision to make about language. And let me be the first to tell you, we are certain we didn't get all of our language right, but it was these 3 frameworks that were part of how we thought about making those decisions and continue to think about making those decisions about the words we use. The first is to acknowledge and understand our personal and professional biases about the use of language. I'll share one that I struggle with to this day. And that is people first language versus identity first language. Many years ago, I received a grant here in Pennsylvania from the Department of Human Services, and we had a trainer in that grant who did a training and didn't use people first language at all. I was quickly called into the principal's office and told one more incident of not using people first language would lose our funding, and I quote them, faster than I could use the words people first language. So my original journey to using people first language started out of fear, but over time, I really came to be in line with that, both professionally in how I spoke about things, but even personally. And as we started our work with the NATC and delivering courses and talking about people with disabilities, that bias immediately came up as we started to talk about the people who identify with identity first language. So for example, for me, I want to say people with autism. That's my bias. But there are a lot of folks out there, whether it's autism or other forms of disability, that want to use identity first language. And so it's an autistic adult. And so understanding and recognizing our bias, whether we're writing curriculum, whether we're writing policy or law, is extremely important. And what we had to do at the NATC is make sure we were checking our bias against the preferences of the people we look to serve through our language. And again, I think that that is really applicable to all of our work. We all have that bias, but are we checking it towards the preferences of the people we look to serve with the very language we're using? The second idea that came up a lot for us, and I think again it applies when writing training, policy, or law, and it has several elements. And at the root of it is that we can't always account for every single person's specific preference about language. We need to have a common language. So at the NATC, we attempted to use language that helped us to do several things. One, we tried to find the language that helped us to be most inclusive. 2, person-centered. 3, strengths-based. 4, trauma-informed. And 5, non-stigmatizing. We put all of our words through that funnel to try to find the best words we could at this time. And I want to emphasize at this time. And I think that this is part of the journey as opposed to a destination. An example of how we wrestle with the best language at this time is a word that I know many of you on this call, in this town hall, are also trying to think through, and that's the term self-neglect. I looked at the attendee list, so I know a few of you are on here. I've been influenced by a lot of people around the country to come to a point where I have increasing concern that the term self-neglect has a lot of stigma attached to it. And so at the NATC, we tried to soften it a little bit. We usually say people who are experiencing self-neglect, but we're still using that terminology because at this time, we don't have anything that we've come up with that's better. Maybe in our discussion here in a few minutes, some of you will have some suggestions and you'll see it very quickly incorporated into the NATC. We certainly don't have anything that seems as concise as if I say case of self-neglect. That is much easier to write in curriculum and policy and law than something like cases of people who could use the services of APS to reduce risk for situations where there is not someone else. I could keep going on with that, right? So searching for terms and searching for words that both don't stigmatize or inclusive, not both, but all of those things, inclusive, don't stigmatize, person-centered, trauma-informed, but also having language that is concise has been a real challenge as we look to advance our language. So I think what's important and what we've learned at the NATC is we have to make our most educated determination at this time. And to the best that we can, and I get that it's much easier in curriculum than it is in statute and law, but to the best that we can, allow for the opportunity to evolve that language over time. The third idea that we really used in determining our language is we also didn't want to leave people in the language journey behind. My suspicion is that most of you, by the nature of your involvement on this call, want to be leaders in advancing our language. Even when we can't change our statutory language, we still want to use inclusive, strengths-based, person-centered, trauma-informed, and non-stigmatizing language. As an example for us at the NATC is the term dementia. We believe in a movement away from that term dementia to the words neurocognitive disorder for both accuracy to the diagnosis as well as due to the history of how the word dementia has been used to stigmatize people. But our issue is that many, if not most people, even in professional settings, still use this term dementia. So we have wrestled a lot with how do we balance advancing language while still supporting the common vernacular used about a particular topic. What we've done at the NATC, and what I know many of you do when advancing language, is we've taken the time to explain our language, the definitions, but also to explain the rationale behind our language choices. We're not necessarily here to indoctrinate people to use certain language, but we felt it was really important to provide an explanation so that people could assess and choose to incorporate that language into their language if they agreed with our rationale. I think whether we are doing it in education or using language in policy or just in our work and in our everyday practice, it's really important that as leaders, and I'm going to assume again that all of you, by the nature of being on this call, are leaders in advancing our knowledge, our words and our language, that we don't leave people behind. So those are kind of the three things, and we thought we'd start setting the stage with those three things that we spent a lot of time at the NATC wrestling with and talking with. Like I said, I'm sure we didn't get everything right. It's our journey. We're still on that journey. But we're excited to now shift this conversation to all of you and have a conversation with everyone to hear about where you are on this journey. Just like we've had to do at the NATC, what are some of the things that you're wrestling with? What are some of the opportunities that we have to advance our language? And what are some of the challenges to doing that in APS or any of the areas that you come to this town hall from? So Andy, do we want to put up the first question for everybody? First question for you is, if you participated in our town hall last year, has any change resulted since that discussion? If so, how? So for those of you that are joining us that participated last year, what's been the developments over this past year? And even if you haven't participated, just think in terms of this last year. What have been some of the things that you have been trying to change over this last year about your own language?
Thanks, Chris, and we'll let people ponder that for a little bit. And I'm glad you added that piece about in the last, even if you didn't participate last year, what change we made, because language has been changing rapidly. I think it's a snowball effect. It's picked up a lot of speed lately. So again, if you want to raise your hand, we will unmute you, and then you'll need to unmute yourself, and you can make some verbal comments, or you can type in the chat/questions box and let us know. Just as we're waiting on that, I know we talked about alternatives to the term self-neglect. When I was at a conference earlier this year, I heard vulnerable adult in need of services, or VAIN. So that was an interesting one. Actually, that's the only one that I have heard as an alternative for self-neglect. And of course, vulnerable, can present its own issues as well. So, but I thought that was an interesting alternative.
It was not a direct result of the town hall, but we have made edits to our handbook to reflect person first language. So that, and then we have another comment, Chris, saying I've been working to educate law enforcement about.
And Jessica, who brought that forward about educating law enforcement, if I can ask?
Anna Thomas.
Okay, great. That's an interesting thing too, that is always a challenge for us in APS, is again, almost that concept of leaving no one behind. We can be as progressive as we want, but at times we have to work with allied disciplines. And I'm not picking on law enforcement by any stretch of it, but any allied discipline in the medical field or wherever that may not be as up to date on the language. And so how do we advance our language, but also continue to work in that multidisciplinary environment?
Yes, I have one more comment. In updating our policies and procedures, including more strength-based language, so using adult instead of victim, etc.
Yeah, that's, and I think many of you know this, victim is embedded in a lot of our statutes, but increasingly we've moved away from that and just focusing on the adult, the individual, the person. What else do you have as far as your journey over the last year in language?
So we have somebody else, a policy type language answer, handbook example, changing the legal term ward to person or persons under guardianship unless it was a legal reference.
Yeah, good. And that's, and what I'm hearing, and people tell me if I'm wrong, what I'm hearing is, it sounds like almost in places that you can't change the statute. You can't necessarily go and change the law. You can't change the legal dictionary or what's embedded in multiple parts of statutes in your state or territory. You're still able to do that in your handbook, in your policy guidelines. That's what I'm hearing, which I think is extremely valuable and important.
Chris, we have Christy out of Oregon. Hi, Christy, saying that Oregon is actually using these discussions and the work within our agency to our statutes, rules, and policies to update and ensure we are using inclusive language and terminology and make a plan to update accordingly.
That's fantastic. And Christy can tell me if I'm wrong, but I've heard that there's a movement in Oregon to stop calling them clients, victims, and just call them Oregonians, right? Just refer to them as Oregonians, as the people that we're serving.
That indeed to your comment. So.
Okay, good. Yeah, I think that was one of our, and I think many of you know this, that was one of our toughest decisions at the NATC, is what do we call the individuals served by APS? In some cases, it's victims. We use the term client. We don't necessarily love it, but it seemed like the most neutral or the most frequently used. But we know some of you still use the term victim, at least in your statute. Here in Pennsylvania, we use the term consumer. And all of these terms usually come out of well-intentioned discussions just like this one 10 years ago or 20 years ago. And so again, part of our journey is to continue to look at how we progress language.
One that stands out in particular, we use, hold on, I think language, this is Melissa, instead of a VA and person alleged responsible instead of perpetrator. So they're, instead of perpetrator, they're using the alleged responsible. That's interesting.
Yeah, that's interesting. And I'll I'll make a comment about that for our next question. Anything else on this question? And again, feel free, if you would like to unmute and share, feel free to do that. All right, Andy, do you think we want to go on to the next question?
Yeah, I think so.
And what was just brought up really segues for me. What are some of the words that are most difficult for you to change your use of, and why? For me, it's perpetrator. As you're thinking of your answer, we want to hear it. I'm just going to give you my example. For me, it's perpetrator. I've been working with you all in training and consultation for APS for 25 years. I grew up with the word perpetrator. That's the word I know. And I have the hardest time getting that, moving away from that. I like your alleged responsible party. I think it's great. But that is a really, really difficult one for me. But I'm working on it, and I've had a little bit of an epiphany, and I've shared this with some of you before. I have 4 adult kids, and I know which one of my kids is going to financially exploit me. I know who it is. I have the intake report filled out for the intake folks here in Pennsylvania. The report's written. When I turn 60 in 9 years, we're good to go. I know which one it is. But when I think about that in terms of what we call people, right now, I'm good with the term perpetrator, but in a few years, am I going to be okay with somebody calling my son a perpetrator? Is that a word that I'm going to want to use? I don't know. I'm wrestling with it. But
That's a really difficult one. That's
a word for me that it's just embedded in everything I've learned in my growing up with all of you in protective services.
Yep, same here. I started in APS in '99, and it's been using it for 24 years now. It's hard to unlearn.
It's hard to get rid of. What are some of the words for you? What are some of those words that are difficult for you to change your use of, that you think you maybe should, or you're at least thinking about? And what are the reasons that you think it's hard to change those words?
One statement that came in, which is similar to California. Claudia said, in our state, we use alleged abuser instead of perpetrator. Not preference, doesn't like the word abuser, but it's been a word our program has been using for 20 plus years. Chris, similar to what you shared. And again, I have 20 years too, Claudia has mentioned, and we used alleged abuser as well.
Yep, I think, Claudia, I think you're so right in how that becomes embedded into our language. What are some of the others that are difficult? What are the words that you find a bit challenging to change?
We got a question coming in. I think vulnerable can be problematic. What does it mean? How do you use it? It can be minimizing or disparaging.
Yeah, and I know that some states are trying to move that as an alternative, as Andy said, to self-neglect. But is it, and I'm just throwing out the question. This isn't a statement, it's a question. But is that term strength-based? Is that, it's certainly, I think, an option when we to move away from the language of self-neglect, but especially when we call some vulnerable person, is it strength-based, or is it as strength-based as we want it to be? How do we move in that direction? I think it's a great question that you're asking.
We have somebody that put in protective service, seems to be potentially a negative attack on the caregiver.
So if I'm understanding the comment, even our own name of our profession might be kind of negative towards the caregiver. Is that what they're saying?
That's what I have in front of me. Give me one second.
Right. That's interesting. I love how you're thinking about this. I'm gonna be thinking about that one for like now a few days. Thanks. You've just set my mind going in that direction. That's really interesting. What else? Are words that you find difficult to change, that kind of you think about changing every once in a while, or at least maybe changing a lot?
We have somebody that put personally, which I like that personally, kind of that looking inwards. I've been trying to remove violence from my language. So cutting edge, bleeding edge, shoot me an email, hit me with your best shot or shoot. Some of these words are also sport related, like shoot hoop, to walk.
I didn't catch that last part, Jessica, and I want to make sure we catch that. The shoot, we caught, I think, the shooting the email, and I did that earlier today with someone, and I caught myself. I'm like, no, I need to change that to send the email. But can you share the last part of their comment again?
Words are also sport related, like shooting hoops, so the line is hard to walk.
Yeah. Yeah, and I'll just share, I like how you shared that. That's a personal journey for me as well. A colleague who I just think so much of and respect has me think, well, it doesn't have me thinking through it. I've removed calling bullet points. They use the term dot points, which I think is great. I just say they're points on the slide now. But removing terms that have a violent connotation or can be connected to gun violence, and thinking through that language when there are substitute terms that still make the point without using them.
I have a few more coming in, Chris. So APS is very close to CPS, and we often have difficulty making contacts when people think we're going to, in quotes, remove them and force them into foster care.
Yep.
And somebody else wrote reframing the word resistant. So that can come with bias, stigma, etc. And this person referenced Lori Delagrammaticus for bringing this up.
Yeah, I love that. I love all of that. I really, this idea of resistance versus perhaps hesitancy, or another word, is one I think we really, really need to look at in our world of APS. And yes, the almost conflating between child protective services and adult protective services, I think, is something to look at in how we present our language.
Minnesota has moved away from using investigation and evidence and now use assessment and fact gathering.
I really like that, but I will admit that that's another one I would answer here on number 2. I still have that investigator type mindset in protective service. And I'm hearing that not just from Minnesota, but in other places of the country, of moving towards more of saying it's an assessment, it's a fact gathering, as opposed to these terms that very much have a almost criminal justice type perspective or angle on how they're used. So yeah, Minnesota, I will give you credit. You are challenging me as we speak on those words and those that language in protective services.
To move on, it's up to you.
Yeah, let's go on to question number 3. So we talked about this a little bit when someone brought up about working with law enforcement, and I'd be very interested. And again, feel free to chat it, but also feel free, if you'd like to unmute, just raise your hand, and we'd love to hear from you. What is the role of APS when working with other professions to advocate for language change? So what's the role in those multidisciplinary environments to advocate for language change. So the one example that was given earlier is if we're talking to an attorney and the attorney is using the term ward, should we correct them? Not correct them because they're probably technically using it right. Should we, like we talked about with the NATC, share with them and explain to them why we're using alternative language? What are your thoughts about what's our role in APS for advocating with other professions for language change?
And while people are pondering that, I will say I think this is Andy, and this is just my stance on it, not the APS TARC stance on it, but I think we have a real leadership role in language change. I think a lot of community organizations, I remember when I was an APS worker, the AAA kind of, our area agency on aging looked to us to kind of set the stage for a lot of things. So the language that we used, would often be mimicked by others. So I think we have quite an impact on that.
Do we have anything else coming in on this?
It looks like we do have a hand raised.
That's
so
great.
I'm going to unmute Michelle Gayette. Michelle, you should be able to speak now and unmute yourself whenever you're ready.
Hey, Andy. Hey, Chris. I was just thinking.
Wait, Michelle, I want to do the talk show host thing. Michelle Gayette from North Dakota. You're on the air. So.
I don't know that it's necessarily APS. I think it's necessarily our role as humans, right? So if we're changing our terminology, and I think Chris, you and I have talked about this. I just did it in a meeting this morning. I used a phrase that I don't normally use anymore, and I corrected myself and I said, I'm trying not to use this because this is what it means to people in this situation, or this is why it would be degrading, or something like that. So I think it's my role as a human to model good behavior, good language, and so I would frame it that way. I'm personally trying not to use this because XYZ.
It's a great point, Michelle.
Yeah, thank you, Michelle from North Dakota.
It looks like we have another hand raised. Oh, sorry, Jessica. Well, I'll go ahead and let this other person. Dominique Jackson has raised their hand. So Dominique, I have unmuted you if you'd like to comment.
Hi, everyone. I think that it's really important for us to be able to advocate for the language change. I think that awareness is the first step. And so oftentimes we get caught up in conversation and we tend, not to be aware of those changes. It goes back to what Chris was saying about like our preferences and our biases. Like we get so caught up in those behaviors that if someone doesn't bring it to our awareness that of the why behind for the promotion of the language change, then they wouldn't even understand that this is a personal journey that they could take on. So I think it's very, very important to start with us. And I agree 100% with Michelle. It's not just in a professional setting. I think it needs to take place in our personal setting as well, especially when we have a lot of different people living in the home. It's like we're setting the standard in our home. For those who have children, when they're leaving the house, you're already setting that so that they start to act this out in their daily lives. And we never know when they leave how many people they're impacting and so forth. So it just spreads, but we have to start somewhere.
Yeah, thank you, Dominique. And just a real quick shout out, Dominique is our brand new project manager at the NATC. So we're excited to have Dominique.
Thank you.
What else do we have to this question?
Couple chats coming in. So one person put, I find it best to model better language rather than challenge or educate people. Then I have another one. It can depend on the situation, personality. I think folks can model or demonstrate it. If someone's curious, they will ask about it. If it's really harmful or impactful, come from an I statement sharing why.
Yeah, great. Appreciate all of that.
But I think it depends on the relationship that you have with your APS colleagues and partners. correcting them wouldn't be a good place to start to understand each other, but at some point you may have to do that.
Yeah. Agreed.
Any others on the phrase self-determination?
What was that about self-determination?
Educating on self-determination, on what the phrase means. So.
Yep. Yeah, I think that's an interesting point. I mean, in not assuming that everybody knows even the language that we use all the time and we accept and we actually put in our values and principles as APS of self-determination, autonomy, and not assuming that everybody knows what that means. Yeah. Being able to articulate that. I think that's really, really important. Great point.
I have a really good strength-based answer here. My thought is it should be an active and collaborative role. We should speak up as we hear things and help facilitate conversation. We need to do both, though, to listen and learn from the conversation and thoughts as well. That is how we remain in the learning and growing and change aspect of supporting and advocating for them.
Yeah, absolutely love that. Thank you.
Did you all want me to move on to the next question?
Yeah, let's go on to the next question in the interest of time. So have clients or advocacy groups asked you to use different language? If so, what was it? And the example that I talked about, that people first versus identity first language. We've heard that at the NATC. We've had particularly disability advocacy groups talk about the need to use different language. So how about for all of you within your states or territories, have clients or advocacy groups asked you to use different language? And that, again, could be kind of as a whole, as a group, but just even in your interaction one-on-one with somebody in practice, has a client asked you to use different terminology with them? And I will confess, as you're sharing your thoughts at the NATC, we're careful. We hope to be careful about all of our language, but when it comes to our language and how we refer to people with disabilities, we spend a lot of time there, and for good reason. Disability advocacy groups will be very vocal with us if we are using the wrong terminology, perhaps more vocal than older adult advocacy groups. That doesn't mean we don't take the language we use for older adults seriously. We absolutely do, but we are mindful that if we use the wrong terms, particularly in regards to disabilities, we're gonna have to give a pretty good explanation as to why we're using those terms, because particularly in the disability advocacy movement, words matter, and they know words matter, and they know words are important. How about all of you? What's been your experience with advocacy groups or even clients?
Chats come in saying that deaf people want to be called deaf, not hearing impaired.
Okay, yep.
I actually have a friend who's deaf who's made that point to me before. It's interesting. It's very common in the deaf community.
And then again, there's another example of generally, not saying for everybody, but identity first language. The deafness is part of who they are. It's a strength, and so it's a deaf person for a lot of people who are deaf. It's a deaf person as opposed to a person who is deaf. How about others? What have you heard from clients or advocacy groups or?
While people are pondering that, I will say maybe we said this earlier as well, it can be good practice to ask your client, consumer, older adult, younger adult with disability, how they prefer to be addressed, and then make a note of that somewhere in the case file so that before you go out the next time you can see what their preference is.
Yeah. This might be too simple of an example, but I am used to, when I did practice, I used to always greet somebody with sir. If it was somebody that at least appeared to be male gendered, I would say sir. And a lot of the time I would get, sir's my father, don't call me sir. So I mean, that's a kind of silly example, but on the other side of that, that was a place where clients said, no, that's not how I want to be referred to. Do we have anything else to this?
Any right now on my end, Chris.
Okay. So let me.
There is one reference to pronouns. Somebody had said, that their clients are correcting them more with their pronouns, which is.
Yes.
Oh, that's fantastic. I really like hearing that. I think something, and this goes to your point, Andy, since we're not getting a lot back from this question, I think one of the things for us to reflect on in APS and the various allied disciplines that we have here is, are the people that we are working with, do they feel empowered to correct our language? And to your point, Andy, of asking, of giving choice, giving that safety and permission to correct us if we use a word they don't like. It's probably pretty important for us to do if we're not hearing a lot from clients or advocacy groups. It probably doesn't mean we're getting all of our language right.
Right, yep.
It tends more to people may, in that moment at least, feel pretty disempowered to share where they've been offended by us or where we've used language that didn't meet their needs.
Come in using active voice when talking about sexual assault. It should not be X was assaulted in quotes without assigning the action of the assault wherever possible. Passive voice divorces the action from the actor.
Ooh, that is really interesting.
Mm-hmm.
Can you get, so maybe I'm the only one that sometimes it takes a repetition to fully digest such a deep point. Can you say that again?
So using active voice when talking about sexual assault, it shouldn't be in quotes, X was assaulted, end quote, without assigning the action of the assault wherever possible. Passive voice divorces the action from the actor.
That's really good. I mean, it's interesting. There's another thing I'm going to now be thinking about for 3 days. Thanks, everyone.
I actually copied and pasted that for Chris. That was a really good one.
Yeah, great.
We have somebody else, clutter versus hoarding.
Yep. One of the things, and I just did a training in Washington on hoarding, is when with situations of hoarding or people experiencing hoarding or having the diagnosis of hoarding, we have to be very careful with how we refer to their things, how we refer to their stuff. If we refer to it in a way that has a negative connotation, that can actually do harm. So yeah, thinking through clutter or hoarding, what's the right words to use when working with clients?
I think the tricky part with hoarding as well is that there's the television show now, Hoarders, and it's more of a mainstream term, so it's developed a more negative connotation.
Right.
In the early days when that was identified, that it wasn't as well known a term, I think, and so now it's
It certainly has, and I think one of the things I think that's always important for us as APS is to realize when there is a term defined by the DSM, we're not clinicians, so we don't get to diagnose. So we also have to be very careful about into a situation and saying this is a situation of hoarding, because hoarding is a clinical diagnosis and we're not equipped to make that diagnosis. We can describe the facts, I think, as was said in Minnesota, whatever word you use there, we can describe, we can do our assessments. But we have to really stop short on some of that language that is clinical language that we do not have, for most of us, maybe there's a few of you on here that do, for most of us, we do not have the clinical role or the clinical licensing to make that diagnosis. And so you're right, Andy, when there are words that are kind of common, but are also diagnoses, we have to be really careful in APS that we don't use them in ways that aren't accurate. I think we have about,
yeah, about 5 minutes. Let me go to the next question.
I think we have 2 more, right? So I think we got about 10 minutes left. So, what is the alternative language you are using or have considered using in your program? I think we've heard some of that already. Assessment over investigation. What is some of the other alternative language that you are using in your program? And that can be at any level of the program. So if you have something that you've moved through the law and statute, great, we'd love to hear about it. If you have something that is in your handbook or your guidebook or your policies, fantastic. But maybe you're a supervisor on this call and just what you're using with your teams, or maybe you do direct practice in APS. What are you using with your colleagues? So at any level, what's the alternative language that you are using or have considered using in your program for any of the words that we've talked about or anything that we haven't talked about yet?
And this is where it'd be great to hear if people have alternatives to self-neglect. That's one that I've really wrestled with. I know I keep bringing that up, but the example that we have here on the slide, which I put down, isn't is less than perfect because it has the term vulnerable, which we've talked about already, is problematic. So self-neglect is so common in adult protective services that a good alternative phrase or word would be very helpful.
And I'm just warning you, if you have a great alternative to it, I am stealing it. I am plagiarizing it. I'm taking it from you. So you need to be willing to share if you have that magic term. We heard with perpetrator, we heard, I think it was responsible person as an alternative. What else are you using in alternatives?
Somebody had put down an adult in need of service.
Okay, good. So rather than victim, rather than client, well, and is that, do you know, or could they comment, is that to self-neglect, or is that in general that they're substituting like clients out for adult in need of service?
Instead of vulnerable.
What's that?
Instead of vulnerable.
Okay. Instead of vulnerable, just an adult in need of service. Okay.
Have another one, person unable to perform self-care tasks.
Yeah. Okay. Good. Person unable to perform self-care tasks. And it doesn't have to be just about self-neglect, but it can be anything. I don't know if they're on this call, but I'll put in a plug for the Academy for Professional Excellence at San Diego State University. Has done a lot on, and they have some great videos and information on how we can approach APS clients, individuals, asking about pronouns, the language that we use, and when to ask about pronouns, the timing of those things. I know pronouns came up earlier, and so that alternative language, again, at the program level or even that level when we're with clients. The Academy for Professional Excellence has a lot of great resources out there on a lot of different things, but on that specific issue. Any other language that you're considering?
We actually had San Diego chime in saying hesitant over resistant. Reason, hesitant can invite a wonder of why they might not be engaging with services, where resistant feels like it's a done deal and sometimes feels negative.
Yeah.
That's a great one. And we often used the word declined instead of refused
Okay. Yeah, declined as opposed to refused. The other one that I know, I think, and I'm not speaking for ACL, but I think I can say, based upon feedback that we've gotten at the NATC, is really moving away from any reference to recidivism. That idea is language that I think all of us probably on this call want to move away from and have alternative language to. Not always an easy one to figure out how to substitute that, but certainly the word recidivism really does have some stigma attached to it. We've got just a few minutes left, and I think we have one more question. Is that correct, Jessica and Andy?
Did you have something, Andy?
Oh, no, I was just saying, I believe that's correct. I think we have one more left.
Okay, let's throw one more question out there. And in our last few minutes, how does the pursuit of updating language affect the people that we serve? How does this, and I think a lot of you touched on this, but if a few of you want to just give us some ending comments on how you think, and you can change this question, why is it important to the people we serve? Why should we sit around and have these town halls? Why at your agency should you sit there and discuss the words that you use? Why at the NATC should we spend hours and hours and hours thinking about this language? Because at the end of the day, it's the people that we serve. I'd love to hear some of your thoughts on why this affects and why this is important for the people that we serve.
There are two come in that really stand out. It really gets to the heart of it. I feel like it might help them feel better about themselves, about their situation, and more open to accepting services.
Yep. Love that.
Yeah, I do too. Language sends messages about who or what is valued.
Yeah. Ooh, that's really good.
Showing respect will enable a better relationship and better outcome.
Yeah.
Trust and rapport with the people we serve to make a difference. There was really a lot of heart in those comments.
I love that. I'm fairly moved by all of those. At the essence of what we do, right? All right. I will just say and turn it over to Andy or Jessica for just the wrap up. I just want to thank everybody. You know, an hour is probably not long enough to have this conversation. We hope we just gave you enough to have these conversations back at your agencies, to continue this with your teams, continue this journey. Any input that you have for us at the NATC, at APS TARC, please feel free to share that with us. And thank you for being part of this language journey. And you know, we'll just keep progressing with it. Not a destination, but we'll stay on this journey. So thank you, everybody.
So much, Chris, and thank you, Tova, both for being here today and talking about this really important subject. I'm so sorry if we didn't get to all your questions and comments today, but here at APS TARC, we do appreciate your participation and really being intentional about making sure our language continues to evolve and really help us serve the population that we all have committed to serving. So there is some info here. If you want to talk any more about discussion questions, you can email at apstarc.ta@acl.hhs.gov. And just a friendly reminder, you those surveys, so we do value your input and feedback. So look out for that. Take that here. And here is our contact information if you'd like to follow us. So again, we'd like to thank each and every one of you for being here today, investing in your own professional development, and we hope to see you soon. All right, take care, everybody. Bye.